Welcome to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Tisinai from Lake Villa PD in Illinois. She has been in law enforcement for the last 23 years and has been chief of police for the last 5. She was the first female chief of police in her department, second female chief in Lake County, Illinois. She is currently the vice president of the Lake County Chiefs of Police Association, board member of the Illinois Association of Chief of Police, and serves on several additional executive boards within Lake County. Wellness is something that is a priority to her, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So welcome to the show, Chief Tisinai. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invite, Paige. I really appreciate it.
Of course, no, I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. I don't know if I told you this offline, but I have done well over 300 interviews, and I think that I've maybe done 10, maybe a dozen interviews with women. So it's always really nice to have, a different perspective. And so I'm looking forward to have you share. And I know in the intro, I said that you were the first female chief of police in the department, second female chief in Lake County, Illinois. So can you give us a little bit of background on you? Why this profession? How did you get started? And what has your career looked like so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So, ironically, when I was in high school, my dad had taken me shooting, and he had a 357 revolver. And so I was shooting that, and the owner of the store said, we have an off-duty police officer. If you want to shoot something other than that really big revolver, you're more than welcome to come in. So I went in a different day and started taking shooting lessons on pistols. And so the police officer took me for a ride along. And so I ended up joining a Explorer program when I was just out of high school for a couple of years. And basically, as a volunteer, you ride along with police officers and things like that. So I really kind of got a knowledge of kind of what police work is. And then when I was 20, I started working in security. And then when I was 21, I started as a dispatcher. And then I completed my bachelor's degree in criminal justice. And then throughout working at a police department as a dispatcher, I actually started to kind of reconsider the profession, just because there wasn't really that many women in law enforcement. And I started testing, and I was failing the physical agility tests. And I really just kind of had a lot of doubt. So I kind of talked myself out of getting into law enforcement. And then I got my master's degree in human services. I was a substance abuse counselor for about 2 years for the health department. And then I had found that I loved the job, but everyone that came to me kept saying, well, I'm here because I'm on parole or probation. I was arrested and things like that. And just the eagerness and the desire that I had to want to be a police officer, I realized was still there. Mm-hmm. So I started testing again. And then at that point, then I had a hard time failing the written exams. And so I had a lot of people, people like, well, maybe you're just not meant, if you have a master's degree, you can't pass the written exam. And so, but I continued to be persistent. And then when I had tested for Lake Villa, that was the first exam I passed. I ended up number 1 on the list. And I've been here, this is my 23rd year, and I'm really glad that I didn't give up. And so, yeah, so that's a little bit, my dad was in the Navy. He was retired as a Navy chief. So I think, I think that has a lot to do with this profession in general. I think there's a lot of similarities in military and law enforcement and first responders. And so I think from that aspect of it, it was just something I always kind of wanted to do. And I'm glad I've met a lot of people who have said, I thought about it when I was younger and you decided not to. So, but that's a little bit about me as far as how I got into law enforcement.
I love that story. I think that's a story of resilience. I love that you said at the end, I'm so glad I didn't give up, and you believed in yourself, even when maybe other people were casting doubt. And I think a lot of us can relate to that. How many of us have had those moments in our lives where we're trying to achieve something and you have other people who are like, yeah, maybe it's not for you,
Right.
or other people kind of, chirping in your ear, and for you to be like, you know what? I'm going to believe in myself and I'm going to keep pushing, even though I'm, tripping and falling along the way. And, maybe it feels like I'm failing and it's not going to happen. And you're like, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep going. And I think that that's something that we should all strive for in our lives, especially if it's something that is really important to you or something that you really want in your life. It's worth fighting for.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Yeah.
My question for you, because I didn't know this when you and I connected before, I didn't realize that you worked with, substance abuse community and that you were a dispatcher. Do
Yeah.
you feel like those experiences gave you a sense of understanding or empathy for other people and other, not only roles within the organization, but also people within the community that you serve as well?
Absolutely. I am so grateful for the opportunity, especially as a substance abuse counselor, because you realize that addiction is it's just so profound. I was also a methadone counselor, and I worked with DCFS for my internship in graduate school. And that is a like family. So if a family is struggling and they would go through child family services. So I had worked with kids and I worked with the moms. And yeah, I mean, I think it gave me a complete different perspective. And really it gave me empathy. And I've been able to that would not only broaden my horizons, but throughout my career, give a different perspective to the officers I've worked with too. And so if there was anything that I could do to provide, whether it was, recognizing triggers or relapses or, that type of thing, or recommend, whether it's NA or AA or different inpatient treatments that we have, just to really already having that background of so many services that are available in this county that maybe law enforcement at the time wasn't aware of. Being able to provide that to people, on calls and, really kind of, and, sometimes people think of family services as sometimes bad, but they were often give families so many services free of charge. So just kind of having that perspective too, and working with DCFS early in my, or before my career, and that kind of seeing some of the people I worked with as a substance abuse counselor and now as a police officer. So yeah, and then coming across different situations, it definitely gave me a different perspective and something that I've been always extremely grateful for.
Yeah, I think it's important to see a bigger picture sometimes and to ask why, or to be inquisitive when we see certain situations, because it's not always black and white, right? It can be really multifaceted. And my parents were both drug addicts, so I'm very familiar with what that looks like and what that does to people and to families. And I've talked about this before on the podcast, but I think because I grew up in that environment, I was able to detach the behavior from the human. And I was able to see like the good qualities of my parents along with the addiction and the behaviors that they had because of that addiction. And obviously they were choosing those behaviors. And so it's not that there's no, responsibility or accountability on them. But I think I was able to have that, emotional intelligence and that empathy to understand that people go through really hard things and the way that they cope with those things can be really negative and unhealthy, and their decisions after that can also be really poor, but it doesn't always necessarily mean that they're bad people. And so I think that that helped me a lot. And then when I started earlier in my career, I actually worked in rehab facilities. So I worked in inpatient and detox facilities. And
Okay.
that was really eye-opening and really tough because these weren't my family members anymore. These were, regular people within the community. And most of them, maybe this is just my experience of where I worked, most of them were really young. And so it was like, how can we intervene as early as possible to try to set them on a better trajectory to make better life decisions, and you would see them leave and come back and, leave and come back and always having these conversations of like, what can we do? How can we be proactive and how can we help them so that they can, choose a different path for themselves? But I have a lot of experience in that, and I think that that helped me too. And so, thank you for sharing because I assumed as much that it gave you, a bigger picture and more skill set, being involved in that community.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's a fine. I've always been grateful for that experience, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's also a testament to like I think sometimes we stick in our comfort zone and we think that like if we stay on a specific path that it's going to get us somewhere, but sometimes saying yes to different opportunities that maybe you don't know are related to what you're doing or trying to expand your education in different areas is really helpful for the task at hand or the current position that you have or maybe even one that you'll have in the future. When you were working in the substance abuse space, you didn't realize that now, 23 years later, as chief of police, it's helping you. And so I think sometimes we're like, we got to stay on this track, but sometimes broadening our horizons and learning about different things in different ways really helps us to succeed long term.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. And I do think that, pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone, like throughout my career, um, once I did become a police officer and I was in patrol for the first like 4 years and the opening came up for investigations, when I was approached about it, it's like, well, I couldn't do that. I don't have the experience. And again, that doubts. So, and I'm again just grateful that I did say yes. And then, and then within about a year of investigations, an opening came up for major crimes. And major crimes has evidence technicians and they have investigators. And, I had interviewed and I'm, interviewing and working along with investigators that have from big cities that have homicides all the time and shootings. And here I'm from a smaller town, only being an investigator for a year, but again, I was just very grateful for the opportunities to learn from a lot of the investigators that had just a lot of experience so that coming back to my agency when I had something that was serious but not a homicide, I could learn from their interview skills, and just being humble and being a hard worker. And, I think initially I had to prove myself because I was an unknown coming from a smaller department with little experience. And once they realized that no job was too small and I didn't care about doing canvas, I didn't care about whatever you need me to do, the answer is always yes.
Yeah.
Where it was the last person to go home and being there first thing in the morning. And, I think having a hard work ethic, but, what you had said, Paige, about pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone. I think I've done that throughout my career, not because I am comfortable with it. In fact, I'm not at all, but I do it anyway. I'm passionate about the community where I work, and if I can, network, I think networking is huge, and getting resources and being open to suggestions. And there's been a couple of times that I've been asked to speak for like newer leaders, new supervisors, and that's something I say is that when you leave here today, network with each other instead of getting together and complaining about things because that's easy to do. But I give everybody a kind of a challenge to network with somebody and bring one idea positive back to your agency before you leave training. And I think if we had that mindset, sometimes I think that can really help.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a few things that you said that I really resonate with. One is that our comfort zones are so restrictive.
Yeah.
If you think about it, like I'm a really visual learner. So like I think about me being on like a little island, and like that's the comfort zone. And it's
Mhm.
like, where do you go from there? If you're always there, you're never ever going to grow or learn or adapt or become better at anything. You're just going to stay right there forever on your own little island. And I think that it does take a lot of courage to step outside of that, and it takes a lot of vulnerability to say like, "Hey, I'm new at this thing, and I do have to prove myself, and I do have to put in extra work. And I think that somewhere along the line, we all became afraid of that. Like we maybe don't want to embarrass ourselves, or we want to give this perception of being all knowing. But for me, I really pride myself on the ability to always be a learner and, open to new things. And it's not always great. Like for me, I have really bad anxiety. And so it doesn't matter how good or how bad something goes. I have a replay button afterwards where I'm like, man, like I should have done this or I didn't do that or whatever. And I have to really work on managing those things. But I keep putting myself out there to do those things because every time there's a lesson, right? And every
Yep.
time you become more comfortable with these things. And you're never ever going to get comfortable if you don't do it. Like
Right.
you don't learn to ride a bike day one. Like you have to do it multiple times, right?
Sure.
And so I agree with you. And the other thing is how we spend our time is so important. And you said it's easy to complain about things. It's
Mhm.
easy to be negative. It's easy to stay in the comfort zone, but it's sometimes harder to step outside of our habits and to develop different ones. And one of the things that I heard that I love, and I use this all the time, is this idea of, when we're learning something new, it said, what was the quote? I want to say this correctly because I don't want to butcher it, but it said, education without action is just a meeting. And I really liked that because it was like, okay, well, what are we here for? Are we here for a meeting or are we here to make positive change? And the hope is that anytime we're doing any sort of presentation or learning seminar or, whatever, are you there just to absorb the information and that's it? Or are you there to implement those things? And my hope is that when we're putting ourselves in those learning environments, that it's to take something that we can then implement to make our lives, whether that's our personal or our professional lives, better. And so I like that you challenge people and you're like, hey, when you walk out of this room,
Mhm.
maybe talk to someone you don't know.
Yes.
Maybe talk about solution-based conversations rather than, the alternative. So I like that a lot.
Yeah.
One of the things that you told me, and we talked right before we hit record, and you just lit up when I said it, was your passion around community policing. Can you talk a little bit about the things that you do within the community and the things that you're really proud of that you guys are doing as an organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm anyone that works here can tell you that I'm passionate about community policing. When I was a sergeant, so where I live, they had it's like a bigger city, and they have a neighborhood policing program. So that was something that we implemented here that I had taken from that city, and we implemented here to where every subdivision has a police officer, so it's very reactive based. So a lot of times people say, well, I don't want to bother the police. So what we've implemented is that every officer is assigned a subdivision, and that subdivision has the officer's email or their phone number for the police department. But most of the time is email. Sometimes people just have a question on what's curfew, what are the direct driving laws, or hey, there's some speeding cars at this time, but they don't necessarily want to call the police, or they just have a question about a grandparent and maybe what their driving privileges and what they can kind of do to navigate that, or things along those lines. And so having that partnership with our community is it's really it's and people can reach out when they want to, so but it's just they kind of have that connection. So I thought if I have it in the city where I live, it would be nice to bring it. So yeah, so that's something that we have. It's a community policing program. And then also we do various activities throughout the whole year. We've started a National Night Out program, which is a nationwide National Night Out, but it's something that we've started participating in. It kind of brings businesses and the community together. And then we do we have our Shop with a Cop. where every child's given $100, and that's based on donations, where for kids that may not normally receive any Christmas gifts. So that's something that's been really special. We've been able to do that for like, I think 16, 17 years now.
Um,
Um, and then we also do coffee with a cob, and then we do ice cream socials. We do quite a few events throughout the year. We have our fall fest, and so we're really engaged with the community. And so, like my office, when you walk in my office, not only do I have a candy jar for the officers, but I say I have an open door policy. But when a resident or someone comes in, I always say, like, this office isn't. It's, yes, I'm the person. This is my office right now because I'm sitting in the chair. But the chief's office is representative of our police department and what we do and all the hard work that our officers put in. And so when you look at my wall, there's a collage of several different activities that we do throughout the year. And I update it throughout the year, and then we have our department picture in the middle of it. And I love it because that is who our officers represent. It's a partnership with the community. And so yeah, we do Special Olympics events. We just did a polar plunge. We did last week or 2 weeks ago, we were invited to a high school for their special needs program. We did a basketball game with them. And so and again, it's just nice. And it's absolute buy-in from the officers too. And when I interview people, I explain that thoroughly, that this is something that we're involved in. And if it's not for everybody. So, think about that before applying, and, everyone here. So they know that from day one. So, but
do you think by having those experiences and then having that visual reminder of the work that you do within the community, that keeps you and your team connected to why you do the job?
absolutely, and I think the why is important too. So when it comes to whether it's quarterly reports or different things I'm doing, it kind of keeps the village, the mayor and the village trustees. Sometimes they come out to our events, which is great. But and we have a comfort dog, Charlie. I know we're going to get into the wellness in a little bit, but that's another big part of, besides the wellness for the officers. But Charlie, she's a 1-year-old lab that we just got, and so we've been able to get her into the schools. And so I remember a few years ago, the superintendent, they had like a leaders in me. So what normally when I would walk into a classroom, all the kids would be like, "Oh, the police is here," and one day I walked into the classroom, and the superintendent had a golden retriever. I may have as well been invisible because the kids loved the dog. And what I saw was the interaction that the kids had with the superintendent. It took the barrier away from the superintendent because she had the dog there. And I've never forgotten that. And I just remember how many kids I would sit down with, and they'd say, "Wow, I've never seen a police before. I've never seen a police officer." So I had told the superintendent, I'd like to change that. I'm not sure how, but I really want to get into the schools in some way, because we don't have a school resource officer in our elementary schools. We do have one in our high school. And so now that we have Charlie, our comfort canine, her and the handler are in the schools, once a week. So it's been able to kind of bridge that gap. So yeah.
I love that. And I think that, it goes back to what we were saying earlier about, how you choose to see things or how you choose to respond to things. And there's so many stressful components and events and calls that you guys experience on a consistent basis, but there's also so much good, and by you being able to get into the community and to see the good that you guys do and to connect with the community and have your comfort dog and have kids that are like, wow, like I'm so excited, or I've never, been able to connect with a police officer before. Like, I think that that's a constant reminder of all the good things that are associated with your profession that are so unique that most people don't get to experience that with the community in the way that you do. And so I love that you're constantly reminding your team of the good work that they do, not just the stress. And then the community also is seeing that the good work that you guys are doing as well to support them. Have you seen a difference in morale or longevity or wellness within your team by doing those community events and partnerships?
Yeah, because I think it's especially really good for the nighttime officers because we work 12-hour shifts. So the nighttime officers work from 6 at night to 6 in the morning. So I think the day shift officers they get to see people out in the community, maybe walking their dogs or having a lemonade stand or, when you're on nights, it's just different. So now when you have the night shift officers that are involved, and I have to say that a lot of the events that we do, the ones for Special Olympics and the Shop at the Cop, and that's all volunteer. And we have, I'd say, close to 100% participation. Like everybody goes. And it's not only us, but a lot of the spouses comes. It's become a family tradition for a lot of the officers where it's not only them and their wife or their husband, but it's their kids too. So now, the kids can relate instead of having this, uh, big officer. Now they have their spouse, they have their kids, and it becomes just an extension of the family. And, the spouses have gotten to know each other, and it's a lot of that, same thing with Special Olympics events. We have a torch run and we'll have several different family members. And we have, if you don't run anymore, then you can jump on a bike or a scooter or whatever it is. And it's just about showing support. And that the why is, it isn't a timed race in the sense of, it has nothing to do with that. It's just about showing, it's about, giving support to Special Olympics of Illinois, and that's really what it's all about. And the fact that we have such a high participation rate, I've always been very impressed with, and if it's continued to grow even more. So it's really great to see.
I do want to talk about wellness with you. And you said you have your comfort dog, Charlie.
Uh-huh.
And I know, we talked about offline about, your philosophy on wellness, some of the things that you've implemented, how you get buy-in, because it seems like you have a lot of participation and buy-in from your team. So can you give us a little bit of insights into the things that you do and maybe your philosophy and how you've been successful?
Sure. So I think we've been successful with our we have like I have support, but we call it kind of like peer support. So we have Charlie, our comfort dog, and so when officers have a hard call, it's just nice to have a dog. It's just distraction. Her tail's always wagging. It's just it is nice. So that was one of the big reasons that I wanted to bring the Comfort Dog program, because it's a stress reliever for the officers. It's a stress reliever when you take her out on calls, things like that. But then we have We Never Walk Alone. So that's a website that the officers can go on. So if they want to talk to somebody, it's anonymous. And we have two peer-to-peer, or sorry, not peer-to-peer, it's peer support counselors that are trained, that are police officers that are trained for peer support through the program. And so they can, it's, police based, so they can talk with another police officer. And in that, if you're struggling, let's say with finance questions, or if you're whatever it is, they have different categories. So that's one way. And then something else that we implemented, which came from the police, the officers' ideas, which was so when you're a police officer, you have to pass, it's called a power test, which is a physical agility test to run and some different things. And so the officers had said, what if we were to set that up as a positive engagement, and we do it twice a year, and if you pass it for your age both times, then you can accrue a day off at comp time that wouldn't cost the department overtime. And so that, again, that's another thing that has grown throughout our police department. So we have, and so much so that we've actually opened it up to the village, because the village saw, because again, it promotes health, it promotes exercise and working out, things like that. So that's another program that's been successful. And then there's also a company called Frontline, and it's therapists, and they also it was a building that was donated, and a fire chief wanted to make it as a um like a safe place for any first responders to go to, that they can just go there on their own if they want. They have different machines, like relaxation machines. They're the word for it. I can't remember what it's called, but they have those set up. Or if you have a debrief and you want to have their debrief from a serious incident, not at your police department, you can go there. So they have it set up to where and police officers can go there 12 times a year. So them, their spouses, their kids. So that's another something that we have to offer as well too. So I think that's kind of summarizes our approach to it.
How do you, I know you said that your officers, came to you and were like, hey, let's incentivize some of these things. We want a day off. I actually had someone tell me one time, they're like, the two things that officers want is money or time off. And so when you incentivize things, how can we, get people to buy in? But it's
Yeah.
interesting. I've never heard anyone say that their department came to them and was like, hey, we want to do this, and usually it's the opposite where the agency is like, please do this and we'll give you a day
Right.
off. Um,
Yeah.
how were you able, like maybe what's the secret sauce to getting the buy-in and the participation across the board? I know you said you have really good participation and buy-in when it comes to your community policing efforts. You have really good buy-in and participation when it comes to your wellness efforts. How are you able to create a culture that is healthy and engaged? And, how are you able to get your leadership on board to where everyone else is then bought in and participating?
I think when I say I have my doors always open, I genuinely mean it.
Mhm.
And so I think creating an environment to where officers feel comfortable coming to, whether it's me, whether it's a deputy chief or, lieutenant, whoever it is. But I think creating an environment to where people feel that their voice is heard.
Yeah.
Um, we don't have, I call it like the top down itis, I can't remember I think this is your ship. I think that's what there's a book, a leadership book I had read. That was something that they had mentioned in there that you know, everybody has a voice. And so there is no ego. If someone comes to me with an idea or maybe a difference of opinion, as long as it's obviously said with respect, I think just having that opportunity. As an example of, I remember a couple years ago, we had a newer officer. In fact, he was not even off probation. I think he was here not even a year, maybe 6, 8 months. And he had went to his sergeant, and usually it's that time of year, like, okay, what are some wish list ideas? And the sergeant said, we have someone that mentioned that they'd like to start off a truck enforcement program. And so he had done the research, and it was like, say, a $20,000 program, which is a lot of money. And I was just, what the officer didn't know and sergeant didn't know is that idea actually matched a goal of what the trustees and the board were looking to do to make our roads safer. And so anyway, I think just having that open dialogue
Mhm.
and having the brand new officer feel comfortable that he can go to the sergeant and say, hey, what do you think about this idea? And then within a year, we had bought the scales, and now we have a truck enforcement program. So I think just being open to ideas and knowing that morale is important, and having, if something is not going well, please tell me. And I can't fix everything, but I can certainly do my best.
Yeah. Well, I think too, what I noticed and what you said is because you're right, you can't do everything, right? And there's going to be a lot of ideas that maybe are not possible right now to implement. But it sounds to me like there's at least receptiveness to hearing and to discussing and to seeing if it is possible. And I think that a lot of times, and I'm sure you've experienced this, I've definitely experienced this in my life where I go to someone with an idea and I got shut down
Mhm.
immediately. And what does that do? Now I don't I feel stupid, I don't want to like go and say that ever again. And so then I make myself smaller and I don't share those ideas. And so I think the importance of what you said was being willing to consider instead of, shutting things down. Because I think that as soon as you do that, it's discouraging for people to then want to come forward with new ideas in the future. And I think also having those open, conversations of, this isn't possible and here's why. But we appreciate it. And like, please come to us with more ideas because it was a great idea, but maybe just not something we can do. Or, hey, thank you. This actually aligns really well. We're going to work hard to get it done. And so having those conversations to where people understand the why, even if it's a no, why is it a no?
Right, absolutely. And I think giving credit when credit's due.
Mm,
I think that officer whose idea it was, who had experience from it, I actually had him do the presentation to the village board.
that's cool.
And that way I knew he would do an excellent job, which he did. But then at the same time, it gives him a platform to say, wow, not only was the chief receptive, but I was able to present this. And who better to present the idea than the person that whose idea it was, who has the experience behind it. So I was obviously there to answer the financial questions and to support him, but it was his opportunity. And so, I think, giving credit when credit's due and taking ownership when maybe things don't always go so well. I would say it's everything falls on me, but when things go well, it's because of their work.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that a lot. And I actually wrote that word ownership down from, the context of that officer now was able to take ownership over that idea and was able to have pride in the fact that he brought that forward. And I'm sure that that boosted his morale immediately. He's like, wow, I work for an agency that allows me to do these things. How cool is that? So
That's exactly what he said.
yeah. And you told me before we recorded that your leadership philosophy is we, not I. And
Yeah.
so I think that that aligns a lot with what you just said of like, hey, it's like it's a team. It's not all about you as a chief. It's about letting your employees and your team shine.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
My final question for you is for the younger men and women who are entering into this career today. What words of wisdom would you share with them? Maybe something that you wish you would have known when you were first starting out.
Well, something that we mentioned earlier, which was about doubt, I would say don't let doubt influence your decisions
Mhm.
because pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone will open a lot of doors in the future. And whether that's going to training that you have the opportunity to go to, but maybe not necessarily have an interest in, go anyway. You can always take something from any training, and then really just networking and trying to bring ideas back to your agency and improve the work environment the best you can. But I would say don't let doubt determine and have an influence over your future and over your what your hopes are and your dreams and whatever those are. I think that's for work wise, that would be something that I would suggest.
I love those words of wisdom. And I think that, like we said before, we've all had those moments of doubt. And I hope that we can all get to the end of our life or the end of our career and have fewer of those I wish
Mhm.
statements, and I think the more that we put ourselves out there and the more we believe in ourselves, then the fewer of those I wish, that we're going to have. So thank
Yeah,
you so much for coming on here today and talking to me about leadership and wellness and all your efforts in community policing. I really appreciate it.
absolutely. Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Of course.